So, usually when we analyze a physical event in the real world, we expect clear, visible proof.
Right, like in physics or engineering.
Exactly. I mean, you drop a glass on a tile floor, it shatters. A security camera captures the whole thing.
Yeah, the glass falling, hitting the ground, breaking into pieces.
Right. You can just point at the footage and say, well, there's the entire story. Cause and effect, captured on tape. It's physical, it's binary.
It's comforting, really. I mean, we like things we can observe and categorize just by looking at them.
Definitely.
The physical sciences let us do that. But then you step into the world of criminal law and, well, that simple video camera suddenly isn't enough to tell you what actually happened.
Which is exactly why we're doing this deep dive today. We are looking at a landscape of human behavior that is inherently murky.
Because a crime is rarely just about what the camera sees.
Right. You have to look at invisible things. You have to look inside a person's head.
And if you're listening to this, you probably know exactly what the stakes are.
Yeah, you're gearing up for the MBE, the multi-state bar examination.
The big one.
Right. You've been through law school, you know the broad strokes, but now you're facing a test designed by examiners who, well, they actively want to trick you with the minutia.
They're building traps.
Yeah.
And to beat them, we need to completely deconstruct the essential elements of crime.
Exactly. We're going to break down the mechanics, the historical reasoning behind these rules, and most importantly, how to spot the exact moment an examiner is trying to bait you.
Yeah, bait you right into choosing the wrong multiple choice answer.
So our strategy today is just clarity. We're dealing with incredibly dense common law history and, statutory interpretation.
Very dense.
So we're going to use simple English. We'll break down the complicated jargon, and we'll pause frequently to recap the rules so you can take strong notes.
That's the best way to lock it into your memory.
Let's start with a foundational roadmap. Whenever the prosecution wants to secure a conviction, they are generally forced to prove 4 distinct pillars of a crime.
Right, the 4 pillars. First, there's the actus reus.
The physical act.
Exactly. The guilty act, the physical movement in the world,
Yeah.
or in some very specific cases, an unlawful failure to move.
Okay, got it. And the second?
Second is the mens rea, the guilty mind. This is the exact state of mind or the specific intent the defendant harbored.
Right. And third is concurrence. I mean, it's not enough to have a guilty act on Tuesday and a guilty mind on Thursday.
No, they have to collide.
Exactly. The mental state must exist at the exact same time as the physical act, and it must actually trigger that act.
Right. And fourth, causation and harmful result. The defendant's conduct has to be the actual and proximate cause of the societal harm.
Okay, so act, mind, timing, and result.
That's the core of it.
Yeah.
But before we dive into the weeds of the physical act, we really have to mention a modifying factor that the examiners love to test.
Oh, right. Attendant circumstances.
Yes, we need to unpack that.
So, an attendant circumstance is basically a special condition or fact that must be present for an act to be considered a crime. It's like a contextual requirement.
Right. The classic example from our source material involves the crime of receiving stolen property.
Think about the elements of that crime. You have to physically receive property. That's the act.
Yeah.
You have to know it's stolen. That's the mind. But the attendant circumstance, the special fact that must exist in the real world, is that the property must actually be stolen.
That is crucial.
So let's say I'm walking down an alley. A guy in a trench coat offers to sell me a luxury watch for $50. He whispers that it, fell off a truck.
Sounds super shady.
Right. I hand him the cash, I take the watch, I have the act, I'm holding it, I have the guilty mind. I fully believe I am buying a stolen watch.
You're convinced of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But here's the twist. The guy is just an aggressive marketer.
Oh, wow.
He bought the watch legally at a department store and just uses this shady persona to sell them at a markup. Am I guilty of receiving stolen property?
You are not.
Really? Even though I thought it was stolen.
Right, because the attendant circumstance is missing.
Hmm?
The property wasn't actually stolen. You had the act in the mind, but the reality of the situation didn't match the statutory requirement.
Okay.
Therefore, the underlying crime of receiving stolen property hasn't occurred.
That's a perfect example of an examiner trap. I mean, they'll give you a defendant with an incredibly guilty conscience to distract you.
Exactly. They want you to ignore the fact that the objective circumstances of the crime haven't been met.
So, pro tip for the MBE, always check the attendant circumstances.
Absolutely.
Okay, let's move into the very first pillar, the physical act itself, the actus reus.
The foundational rule here is comforting, really, in a free society. There are no thought police.
Which is good to know.
Yeah. The law requires a bodily movement. You can sit on your couch for a decade, plotting the most intricate, flawless bank heist in human history.
Just mapping it all out.
Right. You could map out the vault, time the guard rotations, and harbor immense malice toward the bank manager. But until your body moves to execute that plan, the state cannot touch you.
We need a bodily movement. But it's important to clarify that speech is considered a bodily movement in criminal law.
Yes, that's a good point. Talking requires moving your vocal cords, your tongue, your lungs.
Exactly. So crimes like perjury, lying under oath, or solicitation like asking a hitman to kill someone are perfectly valid acts.
Right. The physical act of speaking triggers the liability.
But the courts don't just accept any bodily movement, do they?
No, they don't. The movement has to meet the rule of voluntariness. It has to be a conscious exercise of the will.
So why is the law so obsessed with voluntariness? Why does the system care if a movement was a conscious choice?
It goes back to the entire philosophical justification for having a criminal justice system in the first place. I mean, one of our main goals is deterrence.
Right, stopping people from doing bad things.
Exactly. We use the threat of prison to convince citizens to choose lawful behavior over unlawful behavior. But deterrence only works on conscious choices.
Right, makes sense.
You can't deter a reflex. You can't threaten to sneeze with 20 years to life and expect the person to stop sneezing.
Right.
If a person has no control over their body, punishing them serves no deterrent purpose, and it just becomes purely vindictive.
Let's test this with the human bowling ball hypothetical from the reading.
I love this one.
So person A is standing on a crowded subway platform. Person B violently shoves person A from behind.
Okay.
The force of the shove propels person A forward, causing them to crash into person C, who falls onto the tracks and is injured.
Sounds like a typical law school hypo.
Right. Person A's body physically caused the injury to person C. Is person A criminally liable?
Absolutely not. We'll look at person A's conduct and ask, what was this a product of their own determination?
And it wasn't.
Right. Person A didn't make a conscious choice to move forward. They were acted upon by an outside physical force.
So person A's movement was entirely involuntary.
Exactly. So the chain of criminal liability bypasses A entirely and lands squarely on B.
Other things that fall into this involuntary bucket are medical reflexes, right? Like when a doctor taps your knee with a hammer.
Yes. Or convulsions and seizures.
Yeah.
If someone is having a severe epileptic seizure and their flailing arm strikes someone in the face, there's no voluntary act.
The same goes for acts performed while asleep or totally unconscious, like sleepwalking.
Right. But, and here's where the bar examiners will try to catch you. They know you understand the basic rule of voluntariness.
So they test the exception.
Exactly. It's the known risk trap.
Let's lay this out for the listener. Suppose a defendant knows they suffer from a severe medical condition that causes sudden, unpredictable blackouts.
Okay.
Or maybe they are on heavy prescription medication that comes with a strict warning about sudden narcolepsy. They are fully aware of this fact.
They read the label.
Right. Despite this knowledge, they choose to get behind the wheel of a 2-ton vehicle and drive down a busy highway. They pass out, the car swerves, and they hit a pedestrian.
Now, the defendant is going to argue, hey, at the exact moment the car hit the pedestrian, I was unconscious.
Right. My body was entirely limp.
Exactly. They'll say, there was no voluntary act.
And how do the courts handle that?
They reject the defense.
Why?
Because the courts will, well, they'll trace the timeline backward until they find a voluntary act that caused the harm.
Ah, I see.
The voluntary act wasn't the crash itself. The voluntary act was the conscious choice to turn the key in the ignition, knowing the immense risk they posed to society.
So they voluntarily assumed a deadly risk.
Yes, and that initial choice satisfies the actus reus requirement.
That's a crucial distinction to synthesize. If the unconsciousness is a total surprise, it's involuntary.
Right.
But if the unconsciousness is a known, predictable risk that you recklessly ignored by engaging in dangerous conduct, you are on the hook.
You absolutely are.
Okay, let's pivot to one of the most counterintuitive areas of the actus reus. Omissions.
The failure to act.
Right. Can I actually go to prison for just sitting in a chair and doing absolutely nothing?
Well, I mean, it's rare, but yes.
Yeah.
The common law is highly reluctant to punish inaction. We don't like forcing people to act.
So how does it happen?
To convict someone of an unlawful omission, the prosecution has to prove 3 incredibly strict requirements, and they need all 3.
Okay, let's break them down. Requirement 1 is a legal duty to act. Notice the word legal. We aren't talking about a moral duty here.
No, the duty has to be codified somewhere in the legal framework.
Where do these duties originate?
There are a few primary sources. First, a statute. A legislature passes a law saying you must affirmatively do something.
Like what?
The classic example is filing your taxes. The law says you must file. If April 15th comes and goes and you do nothing, your omission is a crime.
Got it. And the second source?
A contract. You sign an agreement taking on a responsibility. If you're a hired lifeguard, your contract legally binds you to attempt water rescues.
So if you just watch someone drown because you don't feel like getting your hair wet.
Then you've breached a legal duty. You're liable.
And the third source is a special relationship. The law imposes automatic duties on certain deeply intertwined relationships.
Right. Like a parent has a legal duty to protect their minor child from physical harm. A spouse has a duty to aid their spouse.
So that's the first hurdle. You need the legal duty. What's requirement two?
Knowledge of the facts. You must actually know the circumstances that trigger your duty.
So if I'm a parent and my child is drowning in the backyard pool, but I'm in the basement doing laundry with no idea what's happening outside, I can't be prosecuted for failing to save them.
Right.
My failure to act isn't criminal because I lacked knowledge of the peril.
True. But examiners love to test the duty to learn exception right here.
Oh, this is tricky.
Let's go back to our lifeguard. The lifeguard is on duty at the beach. He decides to put on noise-canceling headphones, pull his hat over his eyes, and take a nap.
Terrible lifeguard.
Yeah. Someone drowns 50 feet away. The lifeguard argues, I didn't have knowledge of the facts. I was asleep.
That defense isn't going to fly, is it?
Not at all. Because his specific contract created a duty to observe, a duty to learn the facts.
So he can't use his own bad behavior falling asleep as an excuse.
Exactly. He can't use his dereliction of duty as a shield against the knowledge requirement.
Okay, so we have the legal duty and we have knowledge of the facts. What's the third requirement?
It must be reasonably possible to perform. The law will never demand that a citizen perform a physical impossibility.
Let's use the parent scenario again. The parent sees their child fall into a raging, flooded river.
Tragic.
Yeah. The parent knows the child is drowning, there's a legal duty, and there's knowledge. But the parent is physically paralyzed. Or maybe they have zero swimming ability and would instantly drown if they jumped in.
Right. In that case, the parent is not legally required to jump into the water. It is not reasonably possible for them to perform that specific rescue.
So they're off the hook entirely.
Well, their duty might shift to calling 911 or screaming for a bystander's help, things that are reasonably possible, but they don't have to commit suicide to satisfy a legal duty.
Let's lock this down with a classic bar exam hypothetical. This tests the Good Samaritan rule and the concept of creation of peril.
This is a big one.
Imagine an Olympic swimmer is relaxing on a pier. He looks down and sees a man thrashing in the water, clearly drowning.
Okay.
The swimmer has no relationship to this man. He isn't a lifeguard, but he's an incredible swimmer. Saving the man would be effortless.
Right.
However, the swimmer recognizes the drowning man as his bitter rival. He decides to sit on the pier, eat a sandwich, and watch his rival drown. Does he face criminal liability for homicide?
He does not.
It feels morally abhorrent.
Oh, it is. But legally, he is in the clear. Go back to our 3 requirements. Did he have a legal duty? No. He's not a parent. He has no contract, and there's no statute requiring strangers to save strangers.
Under the common law, there is absolutely no general duty to rescue.
Not at all.
I want everyone listening to internalize that. Write it down. No general duty to rescue.
Very important for the MBE.
But let's tweak the facts. The Olympic swimmer feels a twinge of guilt. He dives into the water. He swims halfway to the drowning man.
Okay, now he's acting.
Right. He gets close enough to see the man's face clearly, remembers how much he hates him, says, never mind, and swims back to the pier. The man drowns. Has the swimmer's legal liability changed?
It is drastically changed. Now he's looking at a homicide charge.
Wow. What?
It's the voluntary assumption of care exception. When he dove in and started the rescue, he voluntarily assumed a legal duty.
Ah, I see.
Once you begin a rescue, you cannot unreasonably abandon it, especially if your initial efforts made the victim worse off or if your presence deterred others from helping.
By starting and then quitting, he breached his newly created duty.
Exactly.
What about the creation of peril? Let's say our Olympic swimmer is standing next to a guy who can't swim. The swimmer thinks it would be a hilarious prank to shove the guy into the deep end.
Not funny.
No.
Yeah.
He shoves him. The physical act is a simple battery, but then the guy starts drowning, the swimmer refuses to help, and the guy dies.
In that case, the swimmer has a legal duty to act because he created the dangerous situation.
Even if it was just a prank.
Yes, if your conduct Even if it's accidental or just a foolish prank, places someone in peril, the law instantly burdens you with a legal duty to take reasonable steps to save them.
And failing to do so transforms your inaction into a criminal omission.
That's right.
So, to summarize omissions for the notes, no duty to rescue strangers. But if you start rescuing, you have to finish it reasonably. And if you cause the danger, you own the rescue.
Perfect summary.
Let's touch on the last piece of the physical act puzzle, possession. How can just holding an object in your pocket be considered a continuous physical act?
Well, the courts treat possession as a voluntary act of dominion. If you have an illegal item like narcotics, unregistered weapons, stolen goods, and you maintain control over it, you're committing a continuous act.
But the control doesn't have to be in your literal hand, right? I mean, I can be liable for something that's miles away from me.
Exactly. That's the difference between actual possession and constructive possession.
Right.
Actual possession is when the contraband is in your pocket or your hand. Constructive possession means it's not on your physical person, but it's located in an area over which you exercise dominion and control.
Like, if I have a locker at the gym and I have the only padlock key on my keychain, anything inside that locker is in my constructive possession.
Yes. Even if you're at home asleep, you're technically performing the continuous act of possessing the contents of that locker.
And possession doesn't even need to be exclusive, does it?
No, it doesn't. You and a roommate can jointly possess a bag of illicit drugs sitting on your shared living room coffee table.
But there is a temporal requirement.
Right. You must have possession long enough to actually have an opportunity to terminate it.
The pickpocket hypothetical.
Oh, go for it.
I'm walking through a crowded market. A pickpocket is running from the police. To ditch the evidence, he slips a stolen diamond necklace into my coat pocket as he brushes past me.
Okay.
2 seconds later, the police tackle me and find the necklace,
You weren't guilty of possession?
even though it was actually in my pocket.
Right. Because you didn't have control of the item for a sufficient period to discover it and get rid of it? You lacked the temporal opportunity to terminate the possession.
Let's talk about the state of mind required for possession. I have to know the item is in my pocket, right?
Yes. You must be aware of your physical possession. But historically, you didn't always need to know the item was illegal.
Right. Ignorance of the law is generally no excuse.
Exactly. However, many modern statutes, especially drug laws, add the word knowingly. They make it a crime to knowingly possess a controlled substance.
Which means the prosecution has to prove I knew the true nature of the substance. If I honestly believe I'm carrying a bag of powdered sugar for baking, I don't knowingly possess cocaine.
Right.
But what if I suspect it? Let's say a guy I know is involved in organized crime hands me a duct-taped book.
Sounds risky.
Very. He gives me $500 and says, keep this in your trunk for a week. Do not look inside.
Okay.
I have a massive suspicion it's drugs, but I intentionally never opened the tape. Can I claim I didn't have knowledge?
You cannot play dumb. The legal doctrine here is called willful blindness or conscious
Oh,
avoidance.
that's a great term.
The law treats deliberate ignorance as the equivalent of actual knowledge. If a jury finds that you were aware of a high probability that the package contained contraband and you took deliberate steps to avoid learning the truth, they will infer knowledge.
You suspected it, you looked the other way, you bought the ticket, you take the ride.
Exactly.
Let's pause and recap the actus reus section for the listener.
Good idea.
Thoughts aren't acts. The act must be voluntary, meaning a conscious choice. Watch out for the known medical risk trap when driving. Omissions require a legal duty, knowledge of the peril, and the physical ability to help. There's no general duty to rescue unless you start the rescue or create the peril. And possession is an act if you have dominion and control, either actual or constructive, and you can't use willful blindness to escape the knowledge requirement.
That covers the body perfectly. Now, we have to transition into the most notoriously complex area of criminal law, the mind. We are moving into mens rea.
So we've established that the law desperately wants to see a guilty mind before throwing someone in a cell.
Yes, a physical act alone isn't enough because we need to separate malice from tragedy.
If I'm cutting down a tree in my yard, doing everything perfectly safely, and a freak gust of wind snaps the trunk and it falls on my neighbor's car, I committed the physical act that destroyed the car.
You did.
But I shouldn't go to prison because I lacked a guilty mind.
Exactly. The mens rea is what makes a person blameworthy. Now, to understand how examiners test this, we have to look at the common law approach first.
Right, the historical rules.
The common law judges, over centuries, divided criminal intent into different buckets. The most heavily tested, and frankly the most complicated, is specific intent.
Specific intent. Let's define the mechanics of this. It's not just wanting to do the physical act.
No.
It means the definition of the crime requires the defendant to do the act while harboring a very specific future goal or objective.
You are acting with a specific purpose in mind beyond the immediate physical movement.
But this presents an evidentiary nightmare for prosecutors.
It really does.
I mean, how do you prove a secret goal locked inside a defendant's skull? You can't put an MRI machine on the stand.
You have to use circumstantial evidence. You look at the context of the act. Let's use a homicide example.
Okay.
A man shoots another man. The physical act of pulling a trigger is obvious. But that act alone doesn't definitively prove the specific intent to kill.
Right. The gun could have misfired while he was cleaning it. He could have been target shooting and slipped.
So the prosecutor builds a circumstantial narrative. They introduce receipts showing the defendant bought a high-powered rifle and hollow-point ammunition 3 days prior.
That was bad.
They show text messages where the defendant researched the victim's daily schedule. They show that the defendant stood on a rooftop across from the victim's office, used a scope, and fired 3 precisely aimed shots into the victim's chest.
Okay, yeah. All of those external physical circumstances point directly to one logical conclusion. The specific internal goal was to end that person's life.
Exactly. The actions illuminate the specific intent.
Now, there are 11 major specific intent crimes you need to have locked into your memory for the MBE.
Yes, 11.
But don't just memorize them as a random list. Group them logically so you understand why they require a specific goal.
Let's break them into 3 categories. The first category is the inchoate crimes.
The incomplete crimes.
Right. Solicitation, attempt, and conspiracy.
Think about why these need specific intent. By definition, you haven't finished the crime yet. If you are charged with attempted robbery, your physical acts might just be putting on a ski mask and standing outside a bank.
And standing outside a bank isn't inherently illegal.
Exactly. What makes it a crime is your specific internal goal, the intent to go inside and complete the robbery.
Same with conspiracy. You are agreeing with someone else with the specific goal of committing a future crime.
Okay, so that's group 1. What's the second category?
Property crimes involving fraud or theft. Larceny, robbery, burglary, forgery, false pretenses, and embezzlement.
Let's use larceny as the anchor here. Larceny isn't just taking someone's property.
No, it's not.
If I leave a restaurant and accidentally grab your black umbrella instead of my black umbrella, I took your property, but I'm not a thief.
Right, because you didn't have the intent.
To commit larceny, I have to take your property with the specific intent to permanently deprive you of it. My secret goal must be to keep it forever or sell it.
Burglary is another classic example. It's not just breaking into a house. You must break in with the specific intent to commit a felony once you get inside.
If you break in just to get out of a rainstorm, it's trespassing, not burglary.
Exactly. And the third category contains crimes against the person. First-degree premeditated murder and assault.
Because assault is essentially an attempted battery, so you must have the specific intent to commit that battery.
Right.
Okay, so inchoate crimes, property and fraud crimes, and premeditated murder and assault. Why does it matter so much that we categorize these 11 crimes as specific intent? Why do examiners care?
Because of the defenses. This is the entire ballgame for MBE questions.
Oh, this is important.
Yes. Certain defenses only work against specific intent crimes. The examiners will give you a fact pattern where a defendant uses a defense, and you have to know if it legally applies based on the bucket the crime falls into.
What are the big ones?
The 2 biggest examples are voluntary intoxication and unreasonable mistake of fact.
Let's unpack voluntary intoxication because it feels really wrong to lay people.
It does.
If I get blackout drunk of my own free will and I do something terrible, society's instinct is to say, well, you chose to drink, you own the consequences.
And for most crimes, that's absolutely true. But let's apply it to a specific intent crime, like larceny.
Okay.
The prosecution must prove that you formed the specific goal to permanently deprive the owner of their property. But let's say the defense brings in experts who show you drank a bottle of whiskey and consumed hallucinogens.
You were completely out of it.
You were so incredibly chemically compromised that your brain physically lacked the capacity to form complex future goals. You stumbled out of a bar, grabbed someone's expensive leather jacket because you were freezing, and wandered off.
So the jury could look at that and say, well, he committed the physical act of taking the jacket. But because of the voluntary intoxication, he literally could not form the specific intent to permanently steal it.
Right. And if that element drops out, The larceny charge fails.
Yeah.
The intoxication acts as a wedge, severing the specific intent from the act.
Wow. Okay, so that's specific intent. Contrast that with the second common law bucket, malice crimes.
The common law judges carved out two specific crimes and put them in a separate box where specific intent defenses absolutely do not work.
And those are...
Common law murder and arson.
See, they sound like they should be specific intent. I mean, murder sounds like the specific intent to kill. Arson sounds like the specific intent to burn a building.
They often involve that.
Yeah.
But the prosecution doesn't have to prove a specific goal to get a conviction. For a malice crime, the prosecution only needs to prove that the defendant acted with a reckless disregard of an obvious or high risk that a harmful result would occur.
Okay, let's use arson. I'm having a party in the woods next to an abandoned, dry, wooden barn.
A terrible idea.
Yeah, I think it would look incredibly cool to throw a lit stick of dynamite into the barn just to watch the explosion. My specific goal isn't to burn the barn to the ground, you know. My goal is just to make a loud noise and impress my friends.
But the barn catches fire and burns down anyway.
Right. If arson required specific intent, I might have a defense. I didn't intend to burn it.
But it's a malice crime. So the jury just asks, did throwing dynamite into a dry wooden structure demonstrate a reckless disregard of an obvious and high risk of fire?
Yes, undeniably, I ignored that massive risk.
That reckless disregard satisfies the mens rea for malice. And crucially, if you were blackout drunk when you threw the dynamite, your voluntary intoxication defense is useless. Malice crimes do not allow it.
So we have specific intent, which is the goal-oriented bucket, and malice, which is the reckless disregard bucket. The final common law bucket is general intent.
This is essentially the catch-all for everything else.
Yeah.
Battery, rape, false imprisonment.
What's a standard here?
It's much lower.
Yeah.
General intent just requires a basic awareness of the factors making up the crime. You don't need a specific future goal, and you don't need extreme malice. You just need to be generally aware of what you are physically doing.
So if the crime is false imprisonment, which is confining someone without legal authority, I just need to be aware that I'm locking the door and aware of a high likelihood that the person inside doesn't want to be locked in, and I don't have a warrant to do it.
Yes. And from an evidentiary standpoint, a jury can infer general intent merely from the doing of the act itself.
The prosecutor doesn't need a mountain of circumstantial evidence about my secret plans.
Nope. The fact that you grabbed someone and locked them in a closet is generally enough for the jury to say, well, he was aware he was confining them.
Let's synthesize the common law mind for our MBE preppers.
Good call.
Specific intent means act plus a secret future goal. Defenses like voluntary intoxication work here because drugs destroy the ability to plan. Keep the three groups in mind: inchoate, property and fraud, and premeditated murder and assault.
Right. Malice is arson and common law murder. It's a reckless disregard of a high risk, and intoxication defenses fail.
And general intent is just basic awareness of your actions.
Okay, but as with everything in law, as soon as we establish a solid rule, we have to talk about the terrifying exception.
The exceptions. Let's look at strict liability and corporate crime. We just spent 20 minutes explaining why the legal system demands a guilty mind to separate innocent accidents from blameworthy crimes. Strict liability completely throws that philosophy out the window.
It really does. For a strict liability offense, there is no mens rea requirement for at least one element of the crime.
Not at all.
None. If you perform the physical act and the attendant circumstances exist, you are guilty. Full stop. It does not matter how innocent your mind was. It does not matter if you took every reasonable precaution.
A great way to think of it is touching a violently hot stove. The stove doesn't care about your intent.
Not one bit.
It doesn't care if you thought the burner was off. It doesn't care if someone bumped you into it. If your skin touches the metal, you get burned.
The burn is strict liability. In the courtroom, this means that a mistake of fact, even an incredibly well-researched, perfectly reasonable mistake of fact, is never a defense to a strict liability element.
So why does a democratic society allow this? I mean, it feels tyrannical to punish someone who made an innocent mistake.
We allow it mostly for public welfare offenses. These are regulatory crimes designed to keep a complex, industrialized society functioning safely.
Like what?
Think of environmental regulations, food safety laws, traffic laws. Society decides that the danger of, say, tainted meat entering the food supply is so catastrophic that meat packers must be held strictly liable if it happens.
The burden is entirely on them to be perfect?
Exactly. And usually the penalty for these crimes is relatively minor, a fine, maybe the suspended sentence. We tolerate the unfairness because the punishment is low and the societal protection is high.
But this introduces a massive trap for bar takers. The silence of the statute trap.
Oh, this is huge.
Just because a legislature writes a law and forgets to include a mens rea word, like knowingly or intentionally, that does not automatically mean they intended to create a strict liability crime.
Exactly. Courts absolutely despise strict liability. They view it as a drastic departure from the norms of justice.
So if a statute is silent on intent, a judge's instinct is to read some level of intent back into the law. How do they decide whether a silent statute is strict liability or if it requires intent?
They look at the severity of the penalty.
Let's explore the Staples versus United States Supreme Court case from our reading because it contrasts perfectly with standard gun registration laws.
Perfect example.
Let's look at Law 1. A federal statute says it's a crime to possess an unregistered firearm, like a standard handgun. The statute is silent on intent. A defendant gets caught with one.
And he argues, I had no idea it wasn't registered. The guy who sold it to me showed me fake registration papers. I made a reasonable mistake.
So what happens?
The courts have generally held that this specific regulatory law is strict liability regarding the registration status. The defendant must know he possesses a gun, but he's strictly liable for its registration status.
It's a public welfare regulation with manageable penalties, so his mistake about the paperwork is irrelevant.
Right.
Now let's look at Law 2, the Staples case. The statute here makes it a crime to possess an unregistered, fully automatic machine gun.
Again, the statute is totally silent on intent.
The defendant is caught with a modified rifle. He argues, I knew it was a gun, but I thought it was a legal semi-automatic rifle. I didn't know it had been illegally modified to fire fully automatic.
Here, the Supreme Court looked at the penalty. Possessing an unregistered machine gun carried a penalty of up to 10 years in federal prison.
10 years in a cage is not a minor regulatory fine. It's devastating punishment.
Exactly. The court reasoned that Congress could not possibly have intended to send a citizen to prison for a decade for an innocent mistake about the mechanical firing mechanism of a rifle.
Because the penalty was so harsh, the court refused to interpret the silent statute as strict liability.
They ruled the prosecution had to prove the defendant knew the gun was automatic.
That is the rule to memorize. If the statute is silent, look at the punishment. Small fine. Probably strict liability. 10 years in prison. The court will force the prosecution to prove intent.
Now, is there a constitutional limit to strict liability? Can a city just pass a law saying doing X is strict liability and the courts just have to enforce it?
Generally, yes, legislatures have broad power. But there is a famous due process exception established in Lambert versus California.
This is a fascinating case.
Los Angeles passed a municipal ordinance requiring any convicted felon to register with the local police within 5 days of entering the city. If you don't register, you go to jail.
So a woman who had a prior felony conviction moves to L.A. She has absolutely no idea this highly specific local law exists.
Why would she? She just lives her life, fails to register, and gets arrested. LA says it's a strict liability public welfare offense. Ignorance is no excuse.
But the Supreme Court struck it down as unconstitutional. They drew a brilliant distinction between active conduct and passive conduct.
How does that work?
Usually when you engage in active conduct like driving a car or selling food or buying a gun, you are putting yourself in a regulated sphere. It's on you to learn the rules. But in Lambert, the defendant's conduct was entirely passive. She was just existing in a city. There were no circumstances that would prompt a reasonable person to inquire, hey, do I need to go to the police station and sign a book just because I moved into this apartment?
Because her conduct was passive, punishing her strictly for failing to know a hidden local ordinance violated the fundamental fairness of due process.
Passive versus active conduct. A great nuance to keep in mind.
Let's look at another exception to the standard rules. Vicarious liability. This is where you get punished for someone else's physical act.
It's a concept borrowed from civil tort law, specifically respondent superior. In civil law, if an employee crashes a delivery truck while on the job, the company pays for the damage.
And in criminal law,
Vicarious liability holds a person, usually an employer, criminally liable for the conduct of their employee. It removes the need for the boss to perform the actus reus.
but does it remove the mens rea? Does someone still need a guilty mind?
Yes, and this is crucial. Vicarious liability is not the same as strict liability. Strict liability removes the mind. Vicarious liability removes the act for the boss, but the employee who actually committed the crime must still possess the requisite mental fault.
I can imagine business owners terrified by this. Going to prison because a rogue employee broke a law while you were asleep on a Sunday?
And modern courts share that terror. They are extremely reluctant to impose jail time on a faultless employer. Today, vicarious liability is generally restricted to regulatory crimes, and the punishment is almost always limited to fines.
The courts are basically saying, we will make your business pay a financial penalty to encourage you to train your staff better, but we won't put you in a cell for their actions.
Our reading gives a great example of how strict liability and vicarious liability interact. Let's say a state statute makes it a strict liability crime to serve alcohol to a minor.
Okay.
A bartender is working a busy shift. A 17-year-old walks in with a flawless fake ID. The bartender checks it. It looks perfect, and he serves a beer.
Because the statute is strict liability, the bartender is guilty. His reasonable mistake about the ID doesn't save him.
Exactly. But what about the tavern owner who was at home watching baseball? Can the state stack vicarious liability on top of the bartender's strict liability to punish the absent owner?
I'm guessing no.
Generally, no. Unless the statute specifically explicitly authorizes vicarious liability for the owner, courts will not apply it just because the underlying crime is strict liability. It's too far a leap to punish the absent owner without explicit legislative direction.
What about when the boss isn't a human but a corporation? At common law, a corporation was just ink on paper. It had no arms to commit an act and no brain to form an intent. It couldn't be guilty of a crime.
But the modern world is run by corporations, so the law adapted. Today, a corporation can absolutely be held criminally liable, and by necessity, it's always through vicarious liability.
The corporation is punished for the acts of its human agents acting within the scope of their employment. Does it matter which employee commits the crime? If a low-level janitor illegally dumps chemicals, does the entire billion-dollar corporation get indicted?
It depends on the jurisdiction, but many states have adopted the superior agent rule.
What is that?
This rule states that a corporation is only criminally liable if the illegal act was performed, authorized, or recklessly tolerated by a high managerial agent, a director, a vice president, a senior manager.
The logic is that the actions of a high-ranking official actually reflect corporate policy, whereas the actions of a rogue janitor do not.
Exactly. And here's an examiner trick to watch out for. Let's say the vice president of sales commits massive criminal fraud to boost the company's stock.
Okay.
The corporation is indicted, found guilty under vicarious liability, and pays a $50 million fine. Does the vice president get to walk away clean because the company took the hit?
Absolutely not. The corporation's vicarious liability does not erase the personal liability of the human being who committed the crime.
Right. The corporation pays the fine, and the vice president goes to federal prison. They are both on the hook.
Let's take a breath and synthesize before we move on. Strict liability means no guilty mind is required, and mistake of fact is useless.
If the statute is silent, check the penalty. Harsh penalties imply intent is required.
Unconstitutional if it punishes passive conduct with no reason to know the law. Vicarious liability punishes the boss for the Employees Act, but usually only with fines.
And corporations can be liable, often requiring a superior agent to authorize the act. But the individual employee is still personally liable.
Excellent. Now, we spent a lot of time on the common law categories of specific intent, general intent, and malice. If you found those categories a bit blurry and confusing, you aren't alone.
Legal scholars in the mid-20th century agreed. They found the common law definitions ambiguous and inconsistent across state lines.
So the American Law Institute drafted the Model Penal Code, the MPC, to standardize and clarify criminal intent.
They essentially threw out the centuries-old terms specific and general intent and replaced them with a clean, hierarchical framework of 4 distinct levels of fault.
4 words. If you're outlining, make these a major heading. Purposely, knowingly, recklessly, and negligently.
The first 3, purposely, knowingly, recklessly, are judged on a subjective standard. We're looking inside the actual defendant's head. What do they actually know or intend?
Right.
The final one, negligently, is an objective standard. We aren't asking what the defendant thought. We're asking what a hypothetical, reasonable person would have thought in that situation.
Let's dissect them sequentially. Level 1, the highest level of fault. Purposely.
A person acts purposely when it is their conscious object to engage in certain conduct or cause a certain result.
This maps closely to the old specific intent. It was your primary goal. You wanted the outcome to happen.
Right. If you shoot a gun at a target because your deepest desire is to put a hole in that specific target, you acted purposely.
Level 2, Knowingly.
How does this differ from purposely?
A person acts knowingly when they are aware that their conduct is of a certain nature, or they're practically certain that their conduct will cause a specific result.
So the key phrase is practically certain. Exactly. Let's use an explosive hypothetical to contrast them. An eco-terrorist wants to destroy an oil company's corporate headquarters at night.
Okay.
Their conscious object, their purpose, is solely to destroy the building to make a political statement. However, they know the building employs a night watchman who sits in the lobby.
They plant the bomb anyway. The bomb goes off, the building is destroyed, and the watchman is killed.
Did the bomber act purposely regarding the death of the watchman?
No. Their conscious object was not to kill him. It was to destroy brick and glass. If the watchman had called in sick, the bomber would have been thrilled.
But did the bomber act knowingly regarding the death?
Yes. By planting high explosives in a lobby where a person is sitting, the bomber was practically certain that death would result.
They didn't desire the death, but they knew it was an inevitable byproduct of their actions. Therefore, they are guilty of knowingly killing the watchman.
And remember our willful blindness rule from earlier. The MPC explicitly includes that undersortedly, knowingly. If you are aware of a high probability of a fact and consciously avoid confirming it, you acted knowingly.
Okay, level 3. Recklessly.
A person acts recklessly when they consciously disregard a substantial and unjustifiable risk. This is a gross deviation from the standard of care.
Know the subjective element. You must actually be aware of the risk in your own mind. You see the danger, you shrug your shoulders, and you do it anyway.
Driving 90 miles an hour through a school zone while children are crossing. You don't have a purpose to hit anyone. You aren't practically certain you will hit someone, but you recognize the massive risk and choose to ignore it.
That's recklessness.
Yeah.
Finally, level 4. Negligently, the only objective standard.
A person acts negligently when they fail to be aware of a substantial and unjustifiable risk. They didn't see the danger, but a reasonable person in their shoes absolutely would have seen it.
It's important to stress that criminal negligence requires a much higher degree of carelessness than civil negligence.
Right. In a civil lawsuit over a fender bender, a momentary lapse of attention is enough to owe damages. Criminal negligence requires a gross, substantial deviation from standard care.
Let's look at the tragic kerosene doctor case to illustrate this objective standard.
It's a brutal but illuminating case. A man with no medical license holds himself out as a healer. A woman comes to him suffering from an illness.
His prescribed treatment is to wrap her entire torso in flannel cloths soaked in raw kerosene and instruct her to leave them on for 3 days.
She complies and dies from severe chemical burns and toxicity. The man is charged with negligent manslaughter.
His defense attorney stands up and says, look into his mind. Subjectively, he had no malice. He wasn't reckless. He truly, honestly believed in his heart that kerosene was a miracle cure. He was trying to save her life.
Does his subjective belief save him?
No, because negligence is objective. The jury is instructed to ignore the defendant's bizarre personal beliefs.
They ask, would a reasonable person fail to be aware that wrapping a human body in toxic, highly flammable fuel for 72 hours presents a substantial and unjustifiable risk of death?
The answer is obviously yes. Any reasonable person would see the risk. Because he failed to perceive a risk that society deems obvious, he is criminally negligent, regardless of his good intentions.
Another quick note on negligence. Violating a statute can be used as evidence. If a driver is going 40 in a 20-mile-per-hour zone and hits a pedestrian, the fact that they were breaking the speed limit is strong evidence that they were acting negligently.
Okay, so we have the 4 words. How does the MPC apply these words when interpreting a written law?
The MPC provides a brilliantly logical set of rules for statutory interpretation. Rule 1 deals with how a mens rea word travels through a sentence.
If a statute lists a mental state word like knowingly, that single word applies to all material elements of the crime, unless the legislature explicitly writes otherwise.
So if a state passes a law that reads, it is a crime to knowingly sell an intoxicating beverage to a minor.
To get a conviction, the prosecutor must prove the word knowingly attached to every part of that act. The bartender must know they are making a sale, not giving a gift.
They must know the beverage is intoxicating. They can't think it's virgin fruit punch.
And they must know the buyer is a minor. If the bartender reasonably thought the buyer was 25, the knowledge element for that specific clause fails, and the crime hasn't been committed. It travels down the line.
What if a legislature writes a law and doesn't include any mental state word? We already talked about how courts hate strict liability. What is the MPC's default setting?
Rule 2, the default rule. If a statute does not list a mental state, and it isn't clearly a strict liability public welfare offense, the MPC dictates that the default mental state is recklessly.
To convict, the state must prove the defendant acted with at least conscious disregard of a substantial risk.
No word equals reckless. Write that in the margins of your notes.
And finally, Rule 3, the hierarchy rule. Higher beats lower.
Because the 4 levels are a hierarchy of culpability, proving a higher state of mind automatically satisfies a statute that only requires a lower state.
So if a statute says it is a crime to recklessly destroy public property, and the prosecutor proves you purposely destroyed it, you are guilty.
Purpose is higher than reckless, so it more than satisfies the requirement.
But it doesn't flow downward. If a statute requires you to act knowingly, and the evidence only shows you acted negligently, you should have known but didn't actually know, you are acquitted.
You did meet the statutory floor, which means if a legislature wants to allow convictions for mere negligence, they have to explicitly write the word negligently into the law.
Because otherwise, the default bumps it up to reckless.
Let's do a quick MPC synthesis. 4 levels. Purposely is conscious object. Knowingly is practically certain or willful blindness. Recklessly is conscious disregard of known risk. Negligently is objective failure to perceive an obvious risk.
If a word is in the statute, it applies to every element. If no word is there, default to recklessly. Higher mental states satisfy lower requirements. This is a highly testable, very logical system.
We've covered the body and the mind. Now we enter the final phase of our analysis, the collision, concurrence, transferred intent, and the difference between intent and motive.
Concurrence is the glue. It's not enough for the prosecutor to prove you did an act and prove you had a guilty mind.
They have to prove that the mental intent existed at the exact same time as the physical act, A&D, that the intent actually prompted the act.
The intent must be the animating force behind the bodily movement. Let's look at a scenario where they don't match up.
Person A and Person B are neighbors engaged in a bitter feud. Person A reaches a breaking point and forms the specific intent to murder Person B.
Okay.
He decides to drive to a sporting goods store 2 towns over to buy a specialized hunting rifle for the job.
Okay. The guilty mind is fully formed. He has the intent to kill.
He gets in his car. He's so consumed with rage and adrenaline, thinking about his murder plan, that he runs a red light at 50 miles an hour.
He T-bones another car in the intersection, killing the driver instantly.
He gets out, looks at the wreckage, and realizes the person he just killed was Person B, who happened to be driving to the grocery store.
What a stroke of dark luck for Person A. He wanted Person B dead, and Person B is dead by his hand. Is he guilty of premeditated murder?
He is not.
Yeah.
Let's analyze it. Did he have the intent to kill? Yes. Did he perform a physical act that caused death? Yes.
But there is no concurrence.
The intent to kill did not prompt the act of running the red light. The act of running the red light was prompted by reckless or negligent driving.
The act and the murderous intent were entirely disconnected in causality.
He is certainly guilty of vehicular manslaughter or reckless homicide, but he escapes the premeditated murder charge because the concurrence fails.
That makes logical sense. But examiners will try to leverage that logic against you with the single transaction trap. This is where courts bend the rules to prevent defendants from getting away with technicalities.
Let's look at the classic strangle and bury hypothetical. Person A decides to murder Person B. He corners Person B and strangles him.
Person B loses consciousness, and his heart rate drops to almost nothing.
Person A checks for pulse, can't find one, and genuinely believes he has successfully killed Person B.
So the strangulation was an act prompted by the intent to kill, but it didn't actually cause death?
Right. Now, Person A needs to dispose of the body. He digs a deep grave, throws Person B in, and buries him under 6 feet of dirt.
The reality is Person B was still alive when he went into the ground. It was the dirt that asphyxiated him. The act of burying is what actually caused the death.
Wait, if we apply strict concurrence logic, when Person A was shoveling the dirt, did he have the intent to kill?
No, you can't intend to kill a corpse. His intent was merely to dispose of a body.
So the act that caused death, the burying, lacked the intent to kill. And the act that had the intent to kill, the strangling, didn't cause death. Does he get away with murder?
No court in the country will let him walk on that. To solve this logical puzzle, courts created the single transaction rule.
They look at the entire sequence of events, from the strangulation to the burial, as one continuous, integrated transaction.
Because the transaction began with the intent to kill and ended with the victim dead, the courts essentially smear the intent across the entire timeline to satisfy concurrence.
It's a policy decision to prevent a grotesque miscarriage of justice.
So if you see a fact pattern where someone kills a victim, then accidentally actually kills them while trying to hide the body, it is murder. The intent covers the whole transaction.
Now, what happens when your intent is solid, but your physical aim is terrible? That brings us to transferred intent.
The rule of transferred intent is straightforward. If you intend a criminal harm against one specific victim, but you accidentally cause that exact same harm to a different victim, your original intent transfers to the actual victim.
The law essentially says, you intended to murder a human being, and you murdered a human being. We don't care that the name on the toe tag isn't the one you planned.
I aim a gun at my enemy, person X. I pull the trigger with the specific intent to kill. But I flinch, the bullet misses X completely, travels through a window, and strikes a stranger, person Y, killing them.
My intent to kill X transfers to Y. I am guilty of the murder of Y.
Exactly. This doctrine applies most commonly to crimes like homicide, battery, and arson. If you throw a Molotov cocktail at House A, but it bounces off and burns down House B, the arson intent transfers.
But here's a vital nuance. Defenses transfer too, right?
They do. The intent carries its baggage with it. Let's say person X was actually pointing a shotgun at you, and you fired your handgun at X in perfectly legal, justified self-defense.
But your bullet misses X and hits the innocent bystander, person Y.
When the state charges you with the murder of Y, your intent transfers, but so does your privilege of self-defense. Because you had a right to shoot at X, you are generally shielded from criminal liability for the accidental death of Y.
Though you might face civil negligence. What if my bullet hits both of them? The double penalty rule.
I shoot at X, intending to kill. The bullet passes cleanly through X's shoulder, wounding him, and then strikes Y in the heart, killing Y.
This is where defendants complain about double dipping, but the law is unforgiving. You are guilty of the murder of Y via transferred intent. And D, you are guilty of the attempted murder of X because you performed an act with a specific intent to kill him.
You generated 2 victims, you catch 2 charges.
And now, the ultimate MBE trap on transferred intent, mistake of identity. You need to listen to this distinction very carefully because it trips up thousands of test takers.
Imagine you are hired to assassinate person C. You are waiting in a dark alley. A figure walks by. You sincerely believe it is person C.
You step out, aim, and shoot the figure in the chest, severely wounding them. But as you step closer, you realize you made a mistake. It wasn't person C, it was person D, a total stranger who happened to be wearing the same coat.
Okay, let's break this down. The state charges you with the attempted murder of person D, the person you actually shot. Do we need to use the doctrine of transferred intent here?
No. Transferred intent is irrelevant here. Why? Because you intended to kill the physical human being standing exactly in front of you.
You pulled the trigger, wanting to destroy the biological entity in your sights. You made a factual mistake about what name was on their driver's license, but your intent was aimed perfectly at their body.
Therefore, you had the specific intent to kill D, and you attempted to do so. No transfer required.
But let's add a wrinkle. What if the bullet went through person D and also hit a bystander, person E, wounding them as well? The state wants to charge you with the attempted murder of person E using transferred intent.
And that charge will fail.
Huh.
Most courts hold that transferred intent does not apply to attempt crimes. It only applies to completed harms.
If person E doesn't die, you cannot transfer your murderous intent to create an attempted murder charge for a bystander you didn't even know was there.
You can be charged with reckless battery for E, but not attempted murder. Transferred intent is for completed crimes.
Write that in bold. Transferred intent does not apply to attempts. Finally, let's clear up a linguistic confusion that plagues laypeople and law students alike. Motive versus intent.
True crime documentaries use these words interchangeably. The police are looking for a motive. What was his intent? But in a courtroom, they are vastly different concepts.
Intent is the what? It is the physical result you are consciously trying to achieve in the world. Stealing a loaf of bread, burning a house, pulling a trigger.
Motive is the why. It is the emotional, financial, or philosophical reason underlying the offense. Why did you steal the bread? To feed your starving family. Why did you burn the house? To collect insurance money.
And here's the brutal reality of criminal law. Motive is almost entirely immaterial to substantive guilt. A good motive will never legally excuse a criminal act.
Think of the impoverished mother who steals baby formula from a massive corporate supermarket. Her motive is pure. She is trying to keep her infant alive.
But her intent was to permanently deprive the store of its property. She formed the specific intent for larceny. The jury's job is to assess intent. They must find her guilty of theft.
Now, a judge at sentencing might look at her good motive and say, I'm giving you 0 jail time and dismissing the fine. Motive matters heavily for sentencing, but it does not erase the underlying guilt of the crime.
And it works in reverse to protect citizens. Doing a perfectly legal act with an incredibly evil motive does not transform the act into a crime.
Let's say I know you're desperately allergic to bees. I legally buy the vacant lot next to your house, and I legally set up a massive apiary with 1,000,000 bees, specifically hoping one stings you.
My motive is malicious and evil. But my act farming bees on my own property in compliance with zoning laws is legal. A bad motive doesn't manufacture a crime out of thin air. Guilt hinges on intent and act.
Let's do our final synthesis. Concurrence means the intent must prompt the act. Watch out for the single transaction trap where examiners merge a sequence of events to satisfy concurrence.
Transferred intent shifts your guilt from your target to your actual victim, and your defenses travel with it. But you can't transfer intent for an attempt crime.
And finally, motive is the why, intent is the what. A noble motive never excuses a crime, and an evil motive never criminalizes a legal act.
We have covered immense ground today. We've dissected the voluntary act, the duty to rescue, the intricate common law mental states, the rigidity of strict liability, the logic of the model penal code, and the connective tissue of concurrence.
If you're studying for the MBE, take a deep breath. You've just processed the foundational architecture of criminal law. When you sit down for the exam, don't let the complex narratives overwhelm you.
Strip every question down to these pillars. Identify the act. Isolate the mind. Check the statute for the penalty if it's silent. Look for the attendant circumstances.
And remember that examiners are looking for the exact boundaries of these rules. They want to know if you understand why sleepwalking is a defense, but driving with known epilepsy is not.
They want to see if you can spot a specific intent defense applied to a malice crime. Master the mechanics, and the traps become obvious.
Before we sign off, I want to leave you with a final thought to chew on. We've spent this entire deep dive analyzing human consciousness, the voluntary act, the guilty mind, deterrence.
But we are rapidly moving into a world governed by autonomous technology, AI systems, self-driving cars, complex algorithmic trading bots.
It creates a fascinating philosophical vacuum in the law.
Exactly. Imagine a fully autonomous self-driving car experiences a glitch, swerves onto a sidewalk, and kills a pedestrian. The physical act occurred. But how do we apply actus reus in mens rea?
Who performed the voluntary act? The programmer who wrote the code a decade ago. The passenger who was asleep in the back seat.
And where does the guilty mind live? Can a silicon chip consciously disregard an unjustifiable risk? Can a machine act purposely?
We are attempting to apply common law rules forged in 16th century England to artificial intelligence networks. Eventually, the law is going to have to evolve entirely new categories of liability to deal with entities that act, but do not think.
It's the next great frontier for the legal system. But for now, you just need to worry about the humans on the bar exam. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Trust your preparation, dissect the questions systematically, and we will see you next time.